Well, I've beaten the top cover back into some semblance of order, and I think that that'll probably do the job. Of course, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. So I've got to reassemble this. And my first hurdle at this point is the pointer assembly for the meter. And the problem here are that these two little screw heads, one had pulled right through the top cover at this point, and the other one was just loose and not doing anything particularly useful. Now these screws are a problem. They're unusual. They have a fairly large size for their thread. They're fairly large thread rather for the head size. The head size is quite small. And what's happened here is effectively these screws have folded in where the slot is. The slot's closed up. The screws have pulled, the head's pulled in towards to close the slot up, and that's allowed it to pop through the top cover. So I'll see if I can find some replacement screws. Now, as I said, that's a problem. They're an unusual size. They don't match anything else on the camera. All the other small screws with heads of that size are smaller in their diameter. So if I can't find anything, what I'll do is I will flatten the head back out, effectively spread it back out to its full size, and I'll do that by running it into the hole like that, and then using a flat punch to hit the head and effectively mushroom it out, spread it out, and that'll probably do the job too, but the screw is probably quite weak from being folded. So my first thing I've got to do is sort through screws. Now I've got a tray here of mixed nickel plated screws, and I will just sort through these and see if I can see any likely candidates. I'll pull one of these screws out first, so I've got it here in front of me as a comparison, I think. Now these screws have been damaged, of course, because the knob on here has hit the ground and effectively been pushed it sideways. Often you can see the damage. There's a mark, certainly a mark here. It's hit the ground at that point, and it's hit the ground at that point. So this point here. So certainly that's what's done the job, but of course I've got to fix it. Well, I won't make you watch me sorting through screws. I will just come back when that's done. Well, I searched through my screws. I couldn't find any matches for these, so I used the technique I'd suggested. I screwed them into a piece just like this here, and then used a punch to flatten the head of the screw back out. One of them came out decidedly better looking than the other one, but both of them look usable. So now I'll refit the meter dial to the top of the camera, and hopefully this will go smoothly. Judging by some of the marks inside that top cover, I'd say that this top cover has had other incidents in the past. So perhaps it didn't take as much effort as you'd expect for things to come adrift. To these two screws, I'll just check that that moves smoothly. It does. It doesn't look unduly distorted at all. So I'll tighten those two screws up. without overdoing it. And I want to lock those screws in place with a little bit of lacquer so that the screw heads won't loosen up. I don't know if I can, that's only a halfway measure really. The screws just lack a lot of strength there because there just isn't enough metal left after they've cut the slot. So I'll just put a touch of lacquer on those two spots. And you're probably wondering why they used such undernourished screws to do a job like that. And the long and the short of it is that there's insufficient clearance between here and the top of the meter underneath the top cover to have a decent sized screw head in that position. I'll just put a couple of spots of lacquer there, and all I'm using is cheap nail varnish from the bargain basement type store. Don't use your wife's, she won't like it. Right, so that little bit's done. I've got to turn my attention to putting the glass back in place. Of course, the original piece of glass for the viewfinder window was smashed. Yeah, real job's been done on that. That's and normally when one of these windows breaks, you just simply get a crack across it. It's in two pieces, but you look at the state of that, that's received quite a thump. Okay, so I'll go and find a piece of glass, and I'll do that by stealing it from another top cover. Hopefully I've got an ugly looking one there with a good piece of glass. So I need to put the brackets back in place that hold the viewfinder windows in position. This little one is proving to be a nuisance. One screw in position. I'll just run those up. I want to see what angle that bracket sits at, whether it's square. It's not bad. That'll do the job to hold that glass in place. I'll tighten those two screws up right there. Those holes are slotted so that there's a bit of adjustment, but I think that will be about right to hold my glass in position. And see if the glass will slide down in there and be held fairly firmly. That feels good. I think that'll be fine. Now the other bracket, which also holds in the little rangefinder window, sits up on a couple of standoffs. To get these round the right way, they protrude close, they push towards the front, most of the metals towards the front of the camera. In other words, the holes are closer to the rear. Now there's two of them, they're stacked on top of each other, so it goes from, maximum nuisance value. If they'd used one piece of metal of the appropriate thickness, we wouldn't be having to deal with this crap, but it must have been seen as easier to deal with two pieces than one. And of course the screws for this longer in order to pass through those holes. Let's see if I can get this in position. I only need to get one of the screws started really to get this to go. It didn't exactly feel like it was going in well. Let's see if I can get these brackets lined up. That screw started nicely. Try to roll this other one back, see if the thread picks up better. That does, that's proper, that's correct. Okay, so I won't tighten those screws right up, I'll leave them slightly loose. I've got to get my rangefinder window in there. Fortunately this piece of glass wasn't broken. And if I push that bracket forward to the front of the top cover, make sure those screws are loosened off. Make sure that that bracket is sitting correctly with the main viewfinder window. This window's sitting too high there, so it's going to move that up a bit. The bracket's not caught underneath it correctly. That's better. Do up my two screws. That's looking a bit healthier. Glass is so clean you can hardly tell it's there. And the spring for the frame counter has to go back in place. Now the end, the coil spring end goes into the bracket, and the hook's over here. The underside of that hook goes towards the top cover. Don't have the hook going the other way up, because otherwise it tends to catch on the shuttercocking rack as it travels across, and you end up with problems with your frame counter. So the frame counter's now got its return spring so that that ratchets correctly. And on the top cover, the only thing I've got left to do here really is put the accessory shoe back in place. Now certainly the top cover's got its share of bruises and injuries, but it's comparatively straight, and I don't have any really good spare top covers. Or if I do, they're not going to go on this one. Okay, so there's our top cover. You can see there's a bit of a ripple on the front here. In the chrome you can see that there's a bit of a ripple there. I think once that's down on the camera that probably won't be a problem. The closer you look at this, the more injuries you see. There's one here too. Never mind. I'm quite happy that that'll work. And I've got to turn my attention to other things on this camera. So, what else have we got to deal with? Well, I've got the rewind, of course. And here, the bush is slightly bent because the rewind has been pushed right across. I'm checking that it actually revolves relatively smoothly, and I can't say that it does. The bush is certainly out of round at the top here. I will try a few judicious hammer taps, I think, and see if I can improve the fit of that and see if it looks square after that, because it certainly doesn't look particularly square at the moment. I don't know I'm making any impression on that. That's better. I can certainly see a bend in it. I'll fit this to an old camera body and then I'll give it a few thumps, see if we can get a better fit. So where's a suitable victim? Right here I have a carcass of an old camera. We'll see if we can fit this on here, give it some couple of taps and see if I can get it to look like it's square. There might be a bit of toing and froing on this. All I want is it to be nice and square to the top of the camera, so that of course the shaft will pass up through the centre of the top cover neatly. If I can't straighten it up, well, I can probably find another bush in a better state. But parts for 65-year-old cameras being what they are, yeah, I can certainly see when I look at that that's not square with the top of the camera. Right, what have I got? I can't see my handy mallet. Let's just give this a thump. Just judging this by eye, that's certainly an improvement. I've got a nice wooden mallet that I would normally use to do a job like this, but it's not to hand at the moment. Actually, that looks much improved. I'll just check that those screws are still tight. They are. So I must have moved that bush. That's good. That moves smoothly enough. I think that's good. That can go back on our camera. Where is the camera body? Over here. So much work for a job that was supposed to be replacing a broken screw. That's looking better. Quite happy with the look of that. And the strap lug. Of course the strap lug looked like it had been pushed over. Let's fit that and see what it looks like. And take it off and give it the appropriate bends. The strap lug very much influences where the top cover sits. And if the top cover is not sitting where it should be, you can end up with unwanted friction at the shutter release end in particular. The shutter release might stick, or quite commonly the film release button might stick. It certainly looks like it's been pushed inwards. Apply a little bit of leverage there, I think, to see if we can push that back across. That looks better. Now it's nice and square. I'll just remove that rubber band. That rubber band is there to stop the shutter release shaft from coming adrift. Because, as I've probably told you on previous occasions, if the shutter release shaft gets loose, then it's a nuisance. Bad things can happen. Let's put this top cover on. I want to see what it looks like. That fits quite well. Just going to see what the feel of that shutter release is like in its action. These holes line up well. That shutter release is tight there. At this end it's held to the meter housing. At this end it's held to the strap lug. The shutter release actually might be slightly bent itself there, so I'll have to have a look at that. That sometimes happens. Let's swing that 180 degrees and see what it looks like then. Well, that looks quite different. That's fine in that position. Okay. So I think I've got my strap lug in place. My rewind shaft is all back up in position. I need to get that rangefinder back in position. I'll just get this elastic band in here to hold that shutter release so it can't get away. Now I've blown all this out, so there shouldn't be any more fragments of loose glass lying around anywhere. Everything seems to move smoothly. And look at my rangefinder. It's nice and clean as you'd expect because it's only 18 months since it was all serviced. Something on that glass there, I don't know if it's on the inside surface. The little sparkle, it's probably a piece of glass. So I'll have to remove that rear eyepiece glass there and clean the other face of that. that glass is, when it shattered into tiny pieces, some of that broken stuff. It's just like tiny grains of sand. That was all that was required. Removing a bit of fluff. Now I'm going to look out the window and see what the rangefinder looks like. It's going just past infinity, so I'm just going to, not even going to move anything here, I'm just going to use the adjustment to shift that. That's the infinity stop. That's good. There may be some slight vertical maladjustment there, but that you can really only deal with once it's on the camera anyway. You always make final adjustments at that point. So I did think that most likely the front group here had shifted one way or the other as a result of the thump, and that had put the images out of alignment. Now there is a spot of lacquer down here to lock that in place, and I'm going to renew that in case that had broken. Of course I use clear lacquer for doing that, not the red stuff that you use for marking, or for locking screws and making it obvious that you've locked them.